Welcome to the nextTalk podcast. We are a nonprofit passionate about keeping kids safe online. We're learning together how to navigate tech, culture, and faith with our kids. Today we are joined by Jamie Mershon. Hello. She is a licensed professional counselor who I've known for years.
Yes.
We met at a nextTalk event.
Yes.
So that's how we met.
I was an attendee. Yes.
And she came up to me afterwards and she's like, okay, from a counseling perspective, we got to talk, blah, blah, blah. And I was like,
Yes.
all right, you're going to be my, you're going to be helpful.
It was just, the rest is history.
Yes,
right?
yes. She served on our advisory council for years. She's just a mentor, somebody that I call to for advice, expertise. She's reviewed sections from my book with the mental health stuff and said, okay, yes, this is good, this is not. And so she's just been a great resource for us at nextTalk. But Jamie, tell us a little bit, like that's the professional side.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the personal side.
Yes. Well, I know I've shared my history, but I'll just give a quick refresh. I started off as an elementary school teacher, moved to school counseling. And then once my husband and I started our family with our 3 little girls, I transitioned to private practice. And so that has been the professional journey. And like I said, married with 3 little girls, we have them very close in age. And, you know, we're just in the throes of it because they're all elementary. So we're at 4th, 2nd, and kinder. And so, you know, as we are raising these little girls, we're also doing our own work, my husband and I, in regard to just working through our own stuff. So there is never a dull moment at our house.
Yes.
But thank you for having me.
You're busy. And
yes.
You see kids, you see teenagers, you see parents. I mean,
Yeah.
I've referred so many people to your practice.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, we can't talk about any of that confidential, but I know I've had so many people come back to me. And one of the resounding things is, I didn't know there were counselors like Jamie. You know, that is the one thing that I get a lot. Like, I didn't know counselors like her existed.
I think a lot of it is that God has just put so many different situations in my life, and it makes me very relatable, and I will not judge, and I have lots of things that keep me humble. So I think there's a level of when you're counseling, you have this idea that the person across from you has it all together. And I will be the first to say, no, I do not. So I think that is one thing that, you know, God has really just, you know, given me this heart to just meet people where they're at, because I have been on the other side of it where I'm the one on the couch, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Healing from our own personal trauma, experiences, all of that. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's such a good point. So I asked Jamie to come on the show today because recently we were having breakfast and we were talking about some nextTalk stuff. And she shared this story with me about her daughter. And I was like, oh my gosh, Jamie, that's me. Like, I've done that. And so I was like, come on this podcast and I want to start with the story and then I want to unpack it.
Yeah.
Because we're titling this episode, When You Hijack the Moment.
Right.
Whew.
Yes.
When you hijack the moment. So Jamie, what moment did you hijack?
Well, you know, as I mentioned, I'm a girl mom, right? So there is just lots of, you know, typical girl stuff happening in my house. So we go to a uniform school. So one of my little ones, like, we realized you have no clothes. Like, we just live in uniforms, you know? And so we're like, we need to go shopping. So we did all the fun things, you know, the Target Run Academy, got her restocked with all the essentials, right? And then we get home and she is so excited because she's got this vision. She's going to organize the closet. She's going to make sections. She's going to make labels. Like, she has goals for this closet, right? Of how she's going to organize all of this stuff. And so we're starting, and in my head, I became very task oriented and she was very experience oriented. And so, you know, in the midst of all of our excitement, she's like, oh, let me get the label maker out and I want to create this, right? And I could sense I was getting irritated. Like, no, let's just not make this into a big deal. Like, we just have to get your new clothes and put them in your closet. And, you know, and she is like, no, like the label maker, and we need to order this and I have to get this and let's do this. And I could feel myself just getting more just kind of like annoyed by the process, right? And I totally hijacked it. And I could see her body language go from like excited to just kind of like, oh, like I thought we were going left and now we're going right. And I read her body language and I realized I hijacked her little idea of having this moment with me where we were going to reorganize her entire closet and
Her excitement.
and
her creativity.
her joy. Yes.
It's like I've been in those moments and you're like squelching their little spirit.
Yes.
That's what it felt like
Yes.
to me when I've been in those
Yes.
moments. And a lot of times it's just a practical thing to me too of like, I'm busy. Like I don't have
Yes.
time. We're
Yes.
going from one thing to another and instead of just making the time for it. But
Yeah.
tell me how you unpack this. So did you apologize in the moment? Did you have to think about it for
Yeah.
a day? Like what happened?
Yeah. Well, I definitely filed that away. So then I tried to shift gears and kind of own it. I'm so sorry. Like I can see that, you are really excited about this and I'm so focused on the project and getting this done. And you're more focused on how fun this is that me and you get to do this project. And so I just basically owned it. And I said, can I get a redo? Can I have a restart? Can we do this over? I noticed how you were so excited, right? Is what I told my daughter. And I could tell as I, became task oriented, your joy got less and less and less. And so I just simply asked, can we do a redo? But I had to take ownership of that. And I called it what it was. I just said, to my daughter, we talk a lot about like me being your safe person, right? And me being the person that you can come and tell anything to. And I said, that's kind of confusing when I'm asking to be your safe person and inviting you in to tell me anything, but then yet sometimes I can wound you. And just a reminder that I'm not always going to get it right. But I still desire to be your safe person. And I still desire you to come to me when I don't get it right. But in this situation, I was very aware that I didn't get it right. So I was able to call myself out. But I am trying to train my children to advocate saying, Mom, like, I didn't like how that made me feel, or I didn't like how you handled that. And so in a respectful way that they can advocate and kind of hold me accountable when there's ways where I don't get it right.
Man, I think this is gold. I think because also as I humbled myself when my kids were little and your age, I saw when they got to be older and the attitude would come out more and stuff. I wouldn't even have to call it out because they would humble themselves because I had modeled that for them.
Yes.
I didn't anticipate that. That wasn't a big old like parenting thing on my part. I just felt like God was calling me to be vulnerable and then they became vulnerable.
Right.
But so I think this is just so huge, this whole conversation. But why do you think, okay, maybe it was a busy thing.
Yeah.
You were busy or you needed to get on to the next thing. But were there other reasons why you think you responded that way?
Yeah.
Unpack that for us.
Yes,
because you're a counselor.
Yes,
and I
was
feel
gonna
like
say,
there may be some layers
in the counselor world, there's always like the root, right?
Yeah.
And so I think as parents, a lot of us grew up in the generation where, if we look back, we say, there was food in the fridge, the lights came on, I had what I needed. So on paper, our life was somewhat like we checked a lot of the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that didn't get checked is emotional attunement. So there was a lot of emotional neglect in our generation, I would say. And I see and hear that a lot. And this analogy that I use is, imagine going to the refrigerator. And every time you go to the refrigerator, you go and there's no food. And you keep going back to the refrigerator. And eventually you stop going because you realize the refrigerator is empty. It can't meet this need. And then over time, like your stomach hurts, it's growling, right? And then you turn off the hunger cues because you're like, well, they're just a reminder of an unmet need. A lot of us grew up with emotionally empty refrigerator parents, not because they were intentionally trying to neglect our emotions, but that's a generation that was raised by the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. So their parents were busy. So a lot of them didn't hear, I love you. And a lot of them, they weren't seen and heard, right? So then they look at our generation and they're like, but the lights were on and you had what you needed. And, you had these experiences, right? But a lot of us felt very unseen and unheard. So we just said, well, emotions are useless. So we got really busy. So on papers, a lot of us became high achievers and very task oriented. Mm-hmm. So when our children look at the closet, they have permission to find joy and this experience with their mom. I, on the other hand, look at that and I see it as a task. So I've had to retrain my brain, like, when we're at Target and we get everything off the list and one of my girls wants to go look at skincare, let's just be in the moment. We don't have to be worried like, no, we got everything off the list. Let's check out and go. Like, in knowing that, like, even joy, sitting in joy, like, that's a big deal to them. Or sometimes, if somebody's throwing a fit because they don't want to get their shoes on, we get irritated. Like, we got to go, just get your shoes on. It's a task. Just do it. Right. And so, it could be a tantrum, or it could even just be a joyful thing where they just want to shop around. They don't need anything. The list is done, but just being present and being in the moment. And that's what I missed that day with the closet organization activity.
I want to take a moment here because your analogy of going to the fridge and it's empty, your needs not being met. Yeah. I think that happens a lot.
It does
in good households.
Absolutely, because we kind of just feel like, well, feelings are useless then, right? And we find a way to work through our feelings, and that looks like we stay busy.
And we're dismissive.
Yes,
we're dismissive too, because what if our child, like, to you, the closet organization was a big deal to her. To you, closet organization, even on an experience level, you're like, I don't even care what my closet looks like. Right. I just need it to be there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so hearing what's important to her and being sensitive to that, I think so many times we're dismissive of what's important to them.
Exactly. Right? Because we have bigger things going on. So we just almost get annoyed or irritated when really they're looking for a moment to connect with us.
Oh, I love the example that you said too, because, they'll confide, and if their needs aren't met or they're dismissed or you blow up in your crazy parent mode.
Yeah.
Then there's a resistance there. And like you said, then they ignore the hunger cues.
Yeah.
So then what happens is they become numb and ignore their emotions.
Right. Exactly.
And then everything becomes task oriented.
Right.
Like how we grew up.
Right. And then you look on paper and you're like, wow, you're really a motivated person. No, just a coping mechanism.
And I'm stuffing all the emotions down.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is so good. I think this is just so good for parents. But I also want to be devil's advocate here too. Because on the flip side of this, we're saying, listen to our kids more, be in the moment, be in tune to their feelings, all very, very important. But on the flip side of that, I think some people say, but that goes to the extreme. And then the kids are just dictating everything by their feelings. Parents aren't being parents. There's no boundary, we just go with whatever the kid wants to go with. That's not what we're saying here, right? Like, clarify that, because we're a pendulum swinging world. And I don't want anybody to hear that that's what we're saying. Yeah. Even though we're saying, listen to your kid, be in tune, understand what's important to them. We're not saying bow down to them and they run the show.
Absolutely
That's not what we're saying.
A phrase I use a lot is just keep it the right size, right? So like, think about a cantaloupe. Don't catastrophize it and make it into a watermelon. Don't minimize it and make it a grape. Maybe it is a grape. Then don't make it into a cantaloupe. Just keep it the right size, right? Sometimes not everything is going to be a conversation. You know what? I can tell that you're frustrated. And right now our job is we need to go, but we can talk about this later or we can follow up, right? Sometimes just naming the feeling. We don't always have time for everything to be a conversation, right? In a perfect world, we would. I think we have so much like anxiety around parenting right now of just like all these rules of like, I read a quote, it said this, or this is how you talk about it. We're not always going to get it right, but you have to have peace at the end of the day, knowing like you did the best you could with what you knew, the kind of day you had, where the season you were in life. You really have to be at peace with how you're navigating this. And what I always say is it's not our job to always get it right. I love Philippians, 1:6. And basically it's just, until our last breath, we're not going to get it right and be perfected, right? That's safe for heaven. But on this side of heaven, we are called to grow, right? And because of that, when we don't get it right, part of growth is knowing how to repair and recover. And that's what I did with my daughter. I was in tune to see with her body language, I robbed her joy. I was in tune with myself to recognize what I did in that moment and that I hijacked it. And then I repaired and recovered and I asked for a redo. So when I look back at that, it is actually says more about my healing journey, that I was in tune enough with myself to recognize what I was doing, and I was in tune enough with my daughter. And not all situations in my life look that way, but that is one where I can see the Lord's blessing of the work I've done in my healing and the work He's done in my life. But I think that repair and recover piece is gold.
I mean, that's so important. That's why we say look in the mirror all the time, because we can't heal or fix or help if we can't see what's going on in our own self and dealing with our own stuff that we need to fix.
And we don't even know how to be in tune enough with our own emotions, right? Because a lot of us have turned them off.
Yeah.
So it's having to stop and really feel.
Well, and what I love about this story, parents, is we're saying it's a healthy experience. This is a healthy situation, but she still messed up. And I think that is so hopeful. Yeah. And that makes us not be so stressed out about parenting all the time and saying the right things, because you may say the wrong thing.
Yes.
You may misspeak. You may give wrong, like whatever.
Yeah.
But like walking in that vulnerability of, I didn't get that right. Like, I'm sorry. Man, that is freedom, because then it's almost like I don't have to be a perfect parent.
Right. And you're also modeling reconciliation, right?
Yes.
Because forgiveness is, one person can forgive two people that are forgiving. Like, that's reconciliation. And that's modeling. It's modeling ownership. It's modeling, hey, how do we get it right and not be rug sweepers? Like, no, we're going to talk about it. And, even if I would not have caught myself in the moment, I could have followed up on that 2 days later.
Yeah.
Hey, this has really been heavy on my heart. Remember when we were doing the closet? Like, this is what I noticed. And I've really just been thinking about it and praying about it. I want to apologize. That's okay too.
I can tell there have been so many times in my life where I feel there have been those moments where I've hijacked the moment and I've sucked the life out of my kid, and I saw it and I didn't have the courage to repair right then. And later I would let it go. I would talk myself out of it. And then later, maybe it was I was listening to a pastor or reading a book and it would just hit me. Go back to that moment. Go back to your kid. I mean, sometimes months would have passed.
Yeah.
And I still did it,
Yeah.
Because I think that says something to your kid, especially too, if you've done this like 2 months ago or 3 years ago. It's a moment that you still pops in your mind of, I sucked the life out of them and how I handled that situation. Like, apologize.
Yeah.
Like, go back.
And they may say, Mom, I don't even remember that, but it's more for your mama heart.
Yeah.
Right. It's more for your mama heart. And when you stand before the Lord, you're like, okay, Lord, like, I'm clear of that, right? Like, I felt the conviction. I felt the heaviness.
So good.
I was obedient, that this was unreconciled, and I don't feel at peace with that.
Yeah. And I know this podcast is really about parent-child relationship, and this is so good. But as we're talking about this, I'm feeling a little conviction about spouses here and sucking the life out of them.
Yeah.
And I think as a wife, I sometimes see Matt as like really strong and he can handle it.
Yes.
And like, it's sad to say, but almost like my place where I vent, like he's the holder of all my stuff sometimes.
And you know what? Like, God has equipped men to be that, right?
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we take advantage of
it.
Right? And we're not discerning of like, it's just like a free for all.
Because I think then we shift it into when we're upset about how they handled a situation. We may not say our words as carefully as we would with our kid. Right. Because we're like, he can handle it. He's big and strong and the protector. And I'm just going to tell him, you suck.
Right.
And you see it. You see the
defeat.
Yes. Whatever you want to call it. And I think that's a conviction too, as wives. We have to be thinking about how we do have honest conversations with our husbands. Yeah. Obviously, there's times that I've had to say to Matt, I don't think you handled this right. Yeah. And we talk just like he does with me, but how I'm presenting it. And am I as soft with him and as careful with his feelings as I am with my son? Right. And I'm always not.
Right. And I think sometimes too, we can like almost treat our husbands like IHOP, like they're available 24 hours a day, and they are, but we never say, hey, I really have to talk to you about something like that's been bothering me. Do you have the capacity? Right. Yes. We just expect them to be available and present, and, and if not, then it's like we come up with these like, well, if you really love me, you would want to hear this, or
Yes.
you'd be available. And it's like, it's not that they don't want to, but even as moms, sometimes we're like, we really want to hear from our kids. It's just the timing.
It's
right.
Yeah.
We just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to be as available as we need to be. Right. And if it's something that can wait, right, then I think to honor, you know, their timing of saying, hey, I really want to hear you, but could we talk about this tomorrow? You know?
Well, and I think even what you just said about sometimes we create a thought process in our head of, well, if you love me, you would listen.
Yeah. And you'd always be available.
And then we go down to the spiral of, why can't you be like this person's
Yes.
husband? Why can't we do that with our kids too?
Yeah.
Why can't you be that like
sure.
that kid?
Right.
That's a dangerous place. That
It is.
Satan takes us in, and it's a false narrative that
Yeah.
we're telling our mind. It's not
Yeah.
true most of the time.
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying. A lot of us had to detach from our emotions, right? And become very task oriented. We are not even in tune with ourselves to recognize like, oh, I am creating this whole narrative. If you're living more in the here and now, you're going to be able to recognize when the enemy's coming in, the lies he's telling us. In Ephesians, when it talks about renewing your mind, right? Because we run off of beliefs more than reality. So you'll hear me say that a lot, but it is really true. But it goes back with us being very in tune, because we're so task oriented. It's like, but I want to talk about it now, and I need to get this off my chest now, right? But emotion is saying, oh, this is really heavy on me. Let me have a conversation. And if my husband isn't available, I might feel disappointed, but that's mine to work through, right? That's not his fault. Those are my feelings to sit with and work through. It's not his job to always make me feel great.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's good. We didn't even plan to go to the marriage component, but as we were talking through this, I just kept thinking, man, you know, we do go back and repair and, you know, fix and reset with our kids, and we're soft and we're humble, but oftentimes we won't do that with our spouse.
I agree.
Or like friends that we butt heads with.
Yep.
Same kind of situation here.
Right.
Of that, you know, why did I respond the way that I did?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's needed. I mean, boundaries are good. I'm not saying boundaries are bad.
Yeah.
And just like the husband not being available, he shouldn't always not be available.
Sure.
Obviously, we don't want to go to extremes again.
Well,
but he can't. There may be moments where he's like, I can't do this right now.
I agree.
I need a minute.
I agree. And, you know, I think there's this fear right now because a lot of us are healing ourselves while we're raising children. And we're having to confront really hard things in our past or with our parents. And I don't know if you want to call it a trend, or I don't know the word that I want to use, but just the no contact. There's a lot of fear that parents are like, well, are my children going to be no contact if I don't get it right? And so I think that there is this perfectionism that is being put on parents with their children, where we sometimes put more pressure on that versus like our spouse or the friends in our life, because we just have this fear that our children are going to grow up and not want a relationship with us. So we have to do so many things right.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, this is just my opinion from the work that I do. I think that is a social media push, honestly. It's an online social media. If your parents don't endorse 100% of everything you do, cut them out of your life. They're toxic.
Right.
And
well, it's such an extremist though, right?
It's extreme.
It's like the word narcissist. Everyone's a narcissist, but if somebody truly is, it's almost really hard for people who truly have somebody like that in their life, or truly have a reason to go no contact, or everyone has trauma. And for somebody who truly has complex PTSD, we just have to be careful with all these labels, because I think they're fear mongering. And I think that they create all this comparison and fear. And I just say that, you know, bringing it back to the kids, what we were talking about, I think it creates this heaviness in parenting, because it creates this fear if we don't get it right, our kids, right? Yeah. But that goes back to that accountability and repair and recover.
And the vulnerability.
Yes.
Just being honest about things.
Yes.
And honestly too, like being in the Word of God. Like,
amen.
Honestly, the more I'm in the Word of God, the more humble I become. Yes. Because I realize how flawed I am.
Yes.
And I think that is so important in parenting, for that to come through.
Yes.
You know, I may have handled that conversation wrong. I may have lectured you too much about that. My opinions may have gotten the best of me, and I said things that weren't appropriate. like admitting all of that, because we're all guilty of something.
Right.
Messing up.
And I think like what you said, like you're being very specific. I think sometimes we joke, like we make these blanket statements like, oh, I didn't get it right. I was a hot mess, right? Like it's this false illusion. Like we're being relatable and humble, but like really getting into the weeds. Like, how did you really not get it right? Because there is a lot of generational stuff here. And lots of times if we just really understand somebody's heart behind it or where they were, there's a lot of compassion there. But when there's no ownership or there's really nothing to really help us understand it, it's really hard. We kind of just feel guarded and protected.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right too. It does a disservice. I hate the like, just cut people out of your life mentality. Yeah. Like I hate it because I don't think it's really biblical, honestly. And boundaries are different. Like boundaries are completely different when I'm talking about. But this whole, like, we can't have a conversation, so they're toxic, so we're done. Kind of like calling everybody toxic, because there truly are parents who are abusing their kids. That is a situation that there needs to be no contact.
Right, exactly.
And we're watering that down because we're making every situation like that.
And there are real situations where no contact, like you're always going to have the hope for reconciliation, and that's not lost on you. And that is biblical, right? And there are times where there is a timeout, right? But I think it's really driving a fear in how parents are raising their kids. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, we got a parent out there. They're listening to the show and they're like, oh my gosh, I've hijacked the moment and did something horrible, either with my kids, my spouse, a close friend.
Yep.
It's the best piece of advice.
I would say the repair and recover. I think repair and recover, take ownership. I didn't get it right. Ask for a redo. Model reconciliation. That, I think you cannot go wrong with that.
Yeah, I would also like to add, I'm just thinking about situations where I've had to do this, Jamie.
Because it's vulnerability
because I've had to do it a lot. I think too, the apology and the ownership, be careful with that as far as it doesn't become an I'm sorry, but this is why I did that. Yeah. Because then it becomes you're regurgitating like your side of what you thought. And the apology really just needs to be like, I'm sorry. Well, like I behaved badly.
Or I'm sorry. It's not okay for an adult to speak to you that way. Yeah. Like just take that ownership of really like, what are we sorry for? Because we want to make sure that they understand like, I am sorry. It is not okay for this to happen because you're very clear and you're not normalizing anything. Yeah. So I think the more specific you can be with ownership of just like, I'm sorry, it's not okay for me to speak to you that way. Or I'm sorry, I need to work on being more patient, right? That's putting it all on me.
Well, because I think about your daughter's, the closet, let's circle back to that. You could have said, I'm sorry, but I have this X, Y, and Z to do. And that's why I wanted to do. Yes. Then you're actually making them feel bad for wanting to be creative and
yourself feel better.
And you're making, so that's why I say be careful with the apology. Because a great point. Because so many times we're like, I'm sorry, but we're defending ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it makes the other person still feel bad, and we're not really hearing how we hurt them. Right. And so I do want to put that. I mean, just you can tell I got a lot of life experience.
I love that. And I'm tucking that way as a mom, right? Because I think that's a really good point, Mandy.
Yeah. 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 And I've been so guilty of that. Like, I'm sorry I responded that way, but I had this, and this going on. And then it makes them feel like still kind of dismissed and like it was their fault. And it's not their fault. They're just a kid wanting to hang out with their mom or do something cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. Learn from all of our mistakes.
Right. We kind of went in lots of different directions. But if you really see it as a whole, you can see how there's just so many layers to all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Repair, recover. Yeah. And apologize. Yeah. Like just start out with the apology and it be a true, genuine apology. And not trying to argue your side or defend yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Anything else that you want to say?
I can think of. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for being here. There was a lot of layers to this.
Yes.
And there always is when you're doing hard work.
Right.
But I think this is a really good show. And I know it helped me.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about things I have to go apologize for.
You know what? We're just doing the Lord's work. And He's working through us. And yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. nextTalk is a 501c3 nonprofit keeping kids safe online. To support our work, make a donation at nextTalk.org. NextTalk resources are not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional, or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, legal, financial, or other problem. You are advised to consult a qualified expert for your personal treatment plan.
Our nextTalk podcast is in the top 2% of over 3.4 million podcasts ranked by Listen Notes. But now we're also adding YouTube. So this is a whole new thing we're doing. If you could like, subscribe, and comment on these videos, it would help us so much. We appreciate y'all.